Hello YouTube and welcome back to another week of VCT Pacific Rostermania. My name is Will Cho, one of the casters here at VCT Pacific, and we've been tracking the news that's being announced by teams as they're going through the offseason, making some roster changes, maybe showcasing some of their games at these offseason events. We just want to track how are these rosters looking for 2024. And now that offseason events are actually starting to kick off, we'll probably start to sprinkle in, a little bit of review of how teams have looked with some of their new rosters in the offseason events, but we'll wait until more of the dust settles on that. So let's jump right into week 5 because we actually have quite a decent amount of confirmed news from the teams themselves. Before we get started, I did make a slight change to my color coding as we have more rosters that are basically solidified as a full team. So we're just keeping the light blue as anyone that's signed or announced or re-announced, by the teams themselves officially. That's 100%. Green would be anything that's likely. This is really just for the teams. That's why I made this change. So for instance, we have DRX who they didn't re-announce the continuation of any of their existing contracts, but there's a very good chance that they're keeping all these players. So that's what that is. Any of the teams that I'm pretty sure they're not making any more changes, I just put it in blue, like Paper X. I mean, yes, the offseason is actually it's fairly lengthy, and obviously once the season starts, the roster lock is much later this time around for 2024, so there could still be changes. But, for instance, Paper X, I can't imagine that they're taking out any of these players, right? Unless something drastic happens during the offseason. So, we have that. RRQ we're leaving in green, things like that. We'll talk about RRQ here in a little bit, but those are just the small changes. So just as a note, but the order of the colors stays pretty much the same, so pretty easy to filter out. So getting started, we're gonna start to really just talk about teams that we have news for, and the first one, while it's not really news about the roster itself, worth mentioning, DRX played at 10 Valorant. 10 stands for the Esports Night. It's an event they've ran before in Busan as well, here in South Korea, over on the southern coast, and they had a invitational again this year for the offseason, this time with DRX and T1 from VCT Pacific, then EDG from China, and then Cloud9 actually from North America. And DRX, interestingly enough, they actually took this chance to give some stage time to Flashback. I actually wanted... His name is Flashback, right? Let's just double check. That's what we're running with? Yeah, Flashback. Okay. Just for a second, because it's an actual word, so sometimes you get confused. Flashback was on the DRX Prospects team, right? So he's been under the DRX banner earlier this year on the Academy team, so to speak. So he's not a new addition to the roster, but I did find it interesting that they were giving him stage time right away. Now, we saw this with DRX for Foxy 9 last year as well. When they finally signed him and it was announced, they brought him out for the Daejeon Invitational in Daejeon, South Korea. Last year, I actually got to cast that in Korean and saw his debut under the DRX banner. And then eventually, obviously, they tried to make him work into the starting roster in 2023. Didn't quite pan out. But it is promising to see that DRX aren't just taking these promising young players and then just squatting on them on a prospects team, and just putting them out for loans, as we've seen Bane and Mika now being given out on loan again, just for, I'll just say it like it is, just for money, right? That's not the only thing that's happening. They are actually giving chances to these players that they think they really want to grow the potential and see how they do as they progress. So very cool. I wouldn't read into it too much. It sounds like he's going to be maining Sentinels, so it's not like DRX have a shortage of Sentinels. Both RB and Buzz have been playing quite well whenever they hop onto that role, and then Buzz can also play the chamber quite extensively, so they're not in any strong need for another Sentinel. But it is interesting, right? They're giving the chances. Maybe eventually that means that Flashback now has a chance to try to get into the starting roster if, another player maybe isn't in great condition or they want to make some changes, right? He's going to be kind of first in line. So again, I'm not reading too much into it for 2024. I don't think he's going to like be on the starting 5 or something, but maybe they even list him officially on the bench, something like that, instead of just on the prospects team. So something just to keep a note of. I don't know if we'll do it today, but we will probably go back and pick out some moments from 10 Valorant, maybe just a quick kind of list up of things to note from that event, so we can dive a little bit more into Flashback's performance, which wasn't anything to write home about, but it was nice to get to see, and he did have a couple shining moments towards the end of the tournament, so just keep an eye out for that. Moving on, T1 pretty much all solidified. Now it is interesting to note that there seems to be quite a lot of confidence that Carpe is going to be the 6th man for T1, so it's going to be Zeta, Side Player King, Obscured, and Izu, which I don't think is surprising per se. I mean, if you also just want maybe more veterancy and it's maps and agents that Carpe's already been getting used to, then maybe he jumps back in. We'll have to see. But again, I mean, whether it's Carpe or Obscured or Izu, whichever one, I don't think it's a huge deal. So I think the overall power level stays about the same. All right, next up, actual roster news, GenG. We've had huge question marks about GenG because they let their entire roster, including their coaches, go, except for Meteor, their star player. So they left one star player, and he's been traveling like to events and stuff, right? He was just they just put out a vlog of him in Japan for the Tokyo Game Show. Like, he was there as a Monster Energy player as well, just doing like a fan meet. So they kept him, and we all wondered, okay, so where does this go? And then they announced Texture a little over a week ago, and it's like, okay, well, the firepower's there. They're clearly trying to go into a Korean direction. But my biggest question is who is leading all of this, right? You're gonna need to have somebody who has a picture and a direction and a vision. And while player-driven teams can work in the very early stages of any title, there is a limit to what you can do there, right? And obviously, if you're starting up as an amateur team or something like that, I mean, sure, it's going to be a player-driven team. But, if you're competing against other teams that have all the infrastructure, you're probably going to want one yourself. So the big question is who's leading all of that? And we got our answer, though not one I think any of us expected. So HSK has been announced for GenG as the head coach. Now let's just bring it up here. So those who don't know, HSK was part of VCT Pacific prior as the coach for DFM. And before that, as you can actually see, he was playing right after he ended his military service. So let's give a little bit of further background here. HSK used to be a CS player in Korea, pretty well known for, as CS players go in Korea. For those who don't know, the core DRX roster and the DRX coaching staff, they were all, kind of the legendary Korean players alongside some others like Solo from X Newturn, who's, and Perry, those coaches who are now over on D plus Kia, things like that. So HSK is kind of part of that generation, like right in between the coaches and the younger DRX players. So he has been playing TAC FPSs previously in Korea. He had to go do his military service, and now that ended in 2022. He returned immediately, grinded up in Valorant, and then joined DFM as a player. Nothing to write home about. I actually had a decent amount of hype about him returning to professional play, but then, he put the mouse down and he joined the coaching staff. Now, we all know how DFM season went in 2023. Basically, it's a year that nobody would want on their resume, players or coaches, right? You had 0 wins. And I'm glad I've seen some fans online say, okay, but let's be very honest. Some of those losses were actually really close. And the way they were playing, there were moments where, like, there was reason to have hope. And I absolutely agree. I actually think in the first half of the season, it was like, it's looking rough, but they're like actually improving in the right directions. They have some good reads. It looks like they have a good understanding of the game, but then they kept doing all these roster changes, etc., etc. Let's not get into that, but the end result was a disaster. The process, maybe not. I mean, we will never know the details, but the end result was a disaster. So he was a coach, and then he leaves DFM, whether he's released or he leaves on his own will, who knows, right after the season ends. So he was not there for LCQ. HSK was not part of the coaching staff for LCQ on DFM. And then we heard nothing from him. And now he is the head coach for GenG. Now, teams have different interpretations of what head coaches do, right? Some teams have very, very hands-on head coaches. Some teams, especially in Korea, the head coach is a little bit closer to the GM role where, you're really managing the roster and things like that, managing the roster and your players. Sometimes, you're the one who's kind of running the show, right? Like running the scrims, the practice, etc. But, you have a bunch of analysts and stuff that are really coming up with the nitty gritty. It all depends. And I'm just going to say, I'm going to give GenG the benefit of doubt and assume that they're building a further coaching staff. It doesn't have to be super deep, but HSK, as much as, I don't... Let's put it like this. I don't think HSK shouldn't be given another chance. I think absolutely, for someone of his reputation in Korea for TAC FPS, it's worth giving him another shot. I mean, for DFM, there were so many other factors that you can't pinpoint just one person or one thing on the DFM run, or lack thereof in 2023. So, yeah. Him getting another chance is not head-scratching for me, but him getting another chance on a brand like GenG in VCT Pacific, that's the part where I'm like, okay, I don't have too much faith. However, if they have plans, or if HSK has plans, right, to say, I know where I'm lacking, I'm going to want a deeper coaching staff pool that really knows the nitty-gritties of Valorant specifically, not overall TAC FPSs, then maybe HSK, being a veteran player from the CS days, can actually be a good head coach, right? Where you're helping run the mental, you're helping kind of dictate the strats overall, choose the flow of the game, things like that during a live match. You're the one who's in the coaching seat, things like that. But you've got other people that are really helping come up with the newer strats or, the data and things like that, data analysts, etc. There's a lot of help that you could get. So let's give him the benefit of the doubt. If you build out the coaching staff, I'm curious. I'm not going to say I'm hopeful, but I'm curious. But I also don't blame a lot of the fans for saying that this is a bit of a head scratcher, because not that there's a complete overflow of great coaches in Valorant, because it's a pretty young game, but there were definitely other known options if you really wanted. Especially if you wanted to expand into English-speaking coaching staff. I assume that was one of the other things. They probably didn't want to do that. I always imagined that, having Elmaputty and Bile, but then, Bile being the one in the coaching seat because of the language barrier, but Elmaputty being the head coach, that just never sounded like a great format in my head. Just language barrier is much bigger than you imagine, no matter how much you try to get used to it. So I imagine that they were looking for someone who can be a head coach in Korean, etc. I can only imagine HSK is going to be the one sitting in the coaching seat during matches. But then again, I would love to see them get other coaching staff that can help break down, analyze, prep, innovate for Valorant specifically, not just TAC FPS. So we'll see. I mean, the other thing is if HSK has great scouting, right, for players, maybe he's got a good vision for the roster. So, listen, I'm willing to just leave it there and watch out of curiosity. I'm not hopeful. I don't think it's all doom and gloom, but I totally get that it's a head-scratcher. We'll have to wait and see. Moving on. Yeah, we'll just go in order. So, Jansanity was rumored to be the most likely player to join Team Secret. It was rumored, or more or less confirmed, that he had gone through trials for Team Secret, and everyone thought that this was kind of a lock-in. And then he went and did something really silly. and he posted a clip of like a clutch or something when he was scrimming against Paper Rex. So I'm listing him here as yellow just because it's like, I mean, we haven't really heard otherwise, but in my head it's like, I think this should be a red, right? I think he should be out. And here's the thing. People can change. I'm all for that. People can change, especially esports players, because most esports players are pretty young, okay? So as long as it's not like a, wow, you are like absolute scum of the earth type of deal, like, okay, yeah, like, yeah, people can change, people can mature, but like that change also doesn't happen overnight, right? So listen, I'm not looking at him and saying like, oh, because you posted that one clip on Facebook, I like never want to see your name again in Valorant. Like, I'm not there. But also, if Team Secret does sign him like now after this just happened, I'd be like, not a fan, right? So I don't know what Team Secret's thinking. Who knows? But if I was the one making the decision, I'd be like, listen. I mean, I also, no offense to Giant Sanity, but it's not like Giant Sanity is like the next, coming of Faker in the next Riot games, right? So, or at least it doesn't feel like it yet. I mean, maybe it could be in 2 years. I don't know, but not right now. So I'm not in a rush to close that deal. So I'm just gonna go ahead and say, yeah, I don't think it's likely. I agree. NDG, the most favorite to replace him. We see in chat. I'm gonna assume you have your sources, but we'll keep our eye out. If we hear more inklings, I'll add that for next week, or if there's any lock-ins. But again, I've seen other fans post this as well. We're not in a era of like a lack of Filipino talent. Okay, I think, and a lot of us in VCT Pacific agree, just pure mechanics wise, like there is a deep talent pool in the Philippines. So obviously, whether they have the ability to like get used to a pro setting and stage matches and things like that, yeah, there's a lot of other factors. But in terms of pure mechanics, I think you have your choices. So I don't think Team Secret is too concerned. I wouldn't be too concerned. We'll have to wait and see. Again, I don't, and as I've said throughout when we were doing our rankings, no matter who they pick up, I don't think it really changes my mind of their power level either, right? I think they're a solid, like, I don't mean this in a negative way, but I think they're a very solid gatekeeping team. I think they're a very solid power check team in the VCT Pacific, and I don't think that's going to change. So we'll await news. But yeah, Giant Sanity, probably not likely. Oh, and I will just say this. I wanted to put this down on the record. So then, after that video clip went up on Facebook, a bunch of people were like, whoa, like, you sure want to do this? And a lot of other people were like, yeah, this is bad. This looks bad. Like, this is not good. And then I believe somebody from PRX, the co-owner of PRX, also, like, responded on the Facebook video of like, okay, well, now we know that this happened. And then 3 days later, Giant Sanity puts up a apology that is like, listen, this is just a lesson for everyone. Whenever you're apologizing, and this isn't even about PR, this is like in your personal relationships as well, okay? When you're apologizing, it should never be like, wow, okay, some people thought that was bad, so I guess I take it back. That's like never what you should do when you mean to apologize. I mean, if you are if you're very confident that you're in the right, or like, it's not something you want to budge on, like maybe it's a difference of moral opinions and you're like, well, I don't agree with that. Even if society thinks you're wrong and you like want to protect your own morals, then you can say it like that of like, well, society doesn't agree with me, so I will take it back. But you always have to understand that when you say it like that, there's this implied follow-up sentence of, but I don't actually think I did anything wrong. Okay, your apology should never start with, a lot of people were mad that I did this. It's like, well, like, that's not an apology. That's a okay, society disagrees with me, and I guess I'll have to take it back, but I still don't think I did anything wrong. That's what that statement says. So, which is exactly how his statement started, was a lot of people were angry that I put up this video. And I'm like, okay, well, this apology is already out the window, because you literally just denied any acceptance that you did any fault, which you did. Like, this isn't a gray matter. Like, you did. I mean, you didn't do anything illegal, but you did do something that everyone agrees is not courteous. So, yeah, don't ever do that. And I don't even mean this in like a PR way. Like, you don't have to like get on your knees and grovel, but even in your personal relations with your friends or your significant others or your family, like, never start, if you mean to actually apologize, don't ever start with, I guess you were mad. Right? Like, that's just, you don't want to start it that way. You just want to say, if you don't want to get like, if you don't want to lower yourself, right? If you don't want to get all down on your knees and etc., which, you know, you shouldn't have to most of the time, then you can just say, hey, I'm sorry I did this. It was my bad. It was my mistake. And I'll look to not do it again. Like, that's literally all you have to do. Just a tip. Life pro tip. What do you think would Team Secret affect for Pacific teams? Which one trial member... Wait, what? Which one trial member cannot have secret scrim? What? Can you rephrase that? Do I think that the trial member leaking it is going to affect Team Secret's scrims for Pacific in the future? If that is your question, I don't think it's going to affect it too much. I mean, yeah, I can imagine that some teams will be like, well, do you guys have a trial player? Like, if they're not signed, like, we don't want to do it. No worries. It was just, you had a lot of things you wanted to pack into that sentence, which is why it got a little confusing, but no worries. Not a big deal. I understood. So I can only imagine, like, if you're a team that was okay with screaming Team Secret, even if they were going through trials and now this happened, yeah, I can imagine some teams are like, hey, we don't really want to, like, make that same mistake again. So just, like, let us know when the guy signed, and then we'll, when the player is signed, and then we'll go, we'll scrim you guys. I can imagine that happens. I don't think it's going to make any huge sweeping changes of their scrim potential once, their roster is locked in. Now, I know some teams, right, and I think some, teams in other regions have talked about this in interviews before or vlogs. Some teams just don't like scrimming, right, within the same tier and same region. As much as possible. I mean, DRX used to do this all the time in Korea, which, that's a whole different story, just because it's like, some of us think that also stunted the growth of Valorant in Korea a little bit. But hey, I mean, I guess you're playing to win, so I can't really blame you. So, there might be other teams that already weren't scrimming, whether it's Team Secret or other teams. But yeah, I would hope not. It would really suck if it did for Team Secret. If this suddenly put such a bad taste in other teams' mouths that they were like, hey, we don't want to scrim Secret at all for like the next year, I would feel bad. I mean, I don't think you can really blame the other teams for doing that, but I would feel bad. But I would think it's very reasonable if teams were like, hey, let us know when the roster's locked in. We don't want to scrim with trials just because they're not vetted. That I can see. So, and it's hard to say. It's hard to say what's the right way to do this, because I think when it comes to trials, it really goes both ways. Obviously, for the team that is holding the trials, like, you want to scrim against other teams of the same caliber so that you can really get a feel for it. But at the same time, I think even before this case happened, trial players are not vetted yet, right? You imagine that the vetting process is still ongoing in the background. So if I was an opposing team, I think just by default, I'd be kind of wary. If it was a matter of like, hey, we like submitted the contract, but we're waiting for approval from Riot. I mean, that's, there's like different stages to this, right? So yeah, but I would hope not. I would hope it does not make like a blanket, so to speak, shadow ban for Team Secret, because that would suck. That would really suck. And that's really who by the way, Giant Sanity should be apologizing to. Which he, I mean, at the end he did say like, hey, I gave apologies to both Team Secret and Paper X, but again, the start of that apology was very bad. All right, moving on. Nothing new for Zeta. Oh yeah, I almost forgot that this hadn't been announced yet because we talked about it every week because I thought it was very likely and I was very excited. But hey, Jemkin has been signed to RRQ as the new duelist. Jemkin, for those who don't know, played in Ascension Pacific. He played in Challengers Japan prior. He was playing for the team Scars coming into this year, and he performed very well. And I see a lot of people memeing, and listen, yeah, it's a meme. It's very meme-worthy that he got 0 kills on Reyna, on Bind. It was quite disastrous, actually. He barely got 2 assists, which, by the way, I will just say this. I said this during the analyst desk of this finals match as well, but this just goes to show like why Reyna isn't a strong pick. Because generally you'll get more than 2 assists if you're not getting any kills. With any other agent, right? You're doing something that picks you up an assist. With Reyna, that's kind of hard. Because the only ability you have that could potentially give an assist is your Leer, and you're usually using that for yourself. So yeah, this was disastrous. I get it. It's a meme. I memed about it during the finals on the analyst desk. However, what some other people have pointed out is that he's still top fragged for his team, despite having 0 kills in one of the 3 maps. So he's really good. I will also say this was more credit to Bleed's prep, right? Bleed's prep against Scars' bind comp than Jemkin just like not hitting shots. I mean, yes, you know, he was shakier than some of the other performances we've seen, but this was more like people were just ready for him every time he was turning a corner, right? It wasn't so much that like it was always a fair duel and Jemkin lost. It was more so, I said this during the analyst segment. I wish I had actually gone back and brought up the clip before we started recording. But if I'm not mistaken, in the first like 8 or so rounds, Crazy Guy no, Jemkin, how many first tests did he have? I think all 4 first tests were to Crazy Guy. And then more afterwards. We can actually see their head-to-head at least, right? First kills. Oh, never mind. Just the 2. Okay, so maybe it wasn't just the first kills, but overall. Yeah, he dies to Crazy Guy 5 times. And if you watch how that happens, Crazy Guy's literally just waiting for him to peek, but he like holds these angles where he won't get leered because he knows where Jemkin's been putting up his Leers. It's just really good prep. So it's a little bit of both, right? But there's a lot more to it than that. Obviously, I mean, it's very easy to meme about a 22 ACS score. So yeah, it's a rough game. But hey, still top fragged for Scars, despite having 0 kills in 1 map. And overall, I mean, he was putting up numbers, right? I mean, he was doing very well throughout. Had really good first kills per round. Overall, really good kills per round as well. I mean, he is a duelist. He goes in, gets kills, opens up the site, things like that. And he can op quite well as well. So a lot of people thought Jemkin was very, very promising. But during the early stages of the offseason, there were rumors that Scars was going to try to stay together. There was also questions of like, well, would Jemkin and Crystal ever separate? It seems like they really work well as a duo, things like that. But then we saw the announcements that both of them were looking for new opportunities, that they were released from Scars, and we thought, okay, well, there's some options now. RRQ was looking for a very, very powerful duelist. They were looking for an explosive duelist. And then they released CJ, and so the rumors were that Jemkin was going to join RRQ, and now he has. He has been signed. And I will say, if we look at my ranking from last week, this was not so much. I think starting the 2nd week is when we had him listed as a rumor, and this was all under the assumption that Jemkin gets signed. I think this is very promising. I think this RRQ roster is very promising. right? Jemkin is that player that can like open things up with the op. He's that player that if push comes to shove, he'll just go in and get kills. He'll have these rounds. He'll have these maps where he just completely handles, right, the opposing team. Then you have Estrella, who can help call with flips, right? Who can help play a really communicative initiator role. Sorry, I was blanking out on the word there. You've got Xfero, who also has that wildcard factor like Jemkin, who can just pull up these clutches, pull up these aces, things like that. And then you've got Elmimore, who, you know, he was starting to get a bit more calm. I would say he started to actually, as a result of that, he was having slower starts in the later part of 2023. But we've seen his peak, and he always reaches that peak at least once during the match. Sometimes it starts a little late. Other times he used to get a little too over-aggressive. But, you know, we've seen that that's something that can be tempered and that can be worked on. So it's a very promising roster. And I imagine with Jemkin in there, I imagine that means GenG is now going to be on the bench. Whether he eventually gets released or not is a totally different question. But, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they keep him. He also has a really good clutch factor as well. So, you know, if they want to have a 6-man roster, I think it's totally okay. But I think this is very, very exciting. Confirmed no? As in GenG? Is he officially out? Not yet. They also had him signed to 2026. Oh, yes, staying on the team. Oh, gotcha. Yeah, I mean, well, I'm just saying, like, I mean, this could still, one of these things could change until, you know, during the off season. But to me, it's the same as, like, I mean, technically some of these players from PaperX or GRX could be released at any point, but yeah, it looks like RRQ then is going to stick with a 6-man roster. Whether that means they're rotating players in or not is a different question. However, I can see this. If they do rotate, if we continue to see double controllers being strong on certain maps, you know, maybe instead of putting Elmimore on Viper, they say, okay, Xfero and GenG, double controller it up, right? GenG can play the Viper, you know, anchored down. Xfero can be the one who's a little bit more flexible, things like that. That could work. I mean, 6-man rosters, it's a very double-edged sword, but this group of players, I think it's worth experimenting with. Any possibility to bring Jemkin debut on first off-season in Indonesia? That I could not tell you. I would imagine not likely. Not possible, we see in chat. Yeah. I can't wait to see Jemkin play, though, with this team. I think it's very promising for Jemkin. And, I mean, listen, Jemkin can be the next something, right? He can have a explosive debut in VCT Pacific and really stake out a name for himself. So it's exciting. I think this roster is very promising, and I know I'm a bit of an RRQ fanboy. I know I ride the Hopium and the Hypium for RRQ quite a bit, but listen, they now have those missing pieces, right? They were kind of missing that explosive firepower, individual mechanics that just carry you through some of these slumps. And now they have it, and they have Estrella who can help with more comms as well. I mean, I don't know how much that's actually happening right now, but you know, I think it's very promising, and I promise you, it's not just the Hopium carrying over from 2023. It's not. I think I will even say so far, I think it's one of the more exciting rosters and promising rosters for 2024. Not counting PaperX and DRX, because they're pretty much the same roster. But yeah, I mean, like Bleed and RRQ, I think are like absolutely up there to make something happen in VCT Pacific. So yeah, if you're wondering like, okay, I kind of want to pick out a team, has a new roster, et cetera, or who else should I look out for? I'm saying put RRQ on that list. All right, put RRQ on that list. Okay, moving on. Global esports. So there isn't actually any new news, just so we're clear. I just didn't list Polvi under the rumor tab because I saw one or two rumored reports, and then nothing ever came of that. So I didn't have him listed before, but we had a request on YouTube last week saying, hey, can you discuss the potential of Polvi joining Global Esports? Where are the rumors at? Maybe a little bit of background on Polvi, things like that. So we decided to bring him in. We'll talk about JUGi in a second. This is a personal wish. But so let's talk about, let's get rid of flashback. Let's delete Gemkin there. Let's talk about Polvi. Now, I will say, Polvi joined Valiant in September. So, I mean, I don't really know, because here's the thing. And Global Esports made it sound like they had already, gotten all their contracts, in the works, and they were just waiting for, the last bits, the nuts and bolts, to be completed for them to slowly announce their roster. So Polvi joining Valiant in September, I don't know if that impacts the likelihood of these rumors or not. Listen, I don't work in the rumor department. I just pick up on them and I talk about them. So, yeah, but he is playing well in the offseason so far. And overall, I mean, this is all-time career, but overall his numbers are pretty good. Obviously, also, as you can tell, very much a duelist main. Has tinkered here and there, but very much a duelist main. Comes from Finland, and he's been playing on a bunch of different teams. Now, here's what's interesting. So we can just kind of look at his stats, and he's doing very well over in France, and Valorant is doing very well in France, it feels like. So that's all exciting, but I can only imagine that part of the reason these rumors came to be for Polvi is if you go back and look through his previous teams, right? So he's played on a bunch of different rosters, starting in the very beginnings of Valorant back in 2020. Wow. Really? Was it 2020? That's actually so long ago, but I guess that makes sense if we're including beta and everything. Anyway. So you go back, he played in OnlyFins, for this year, and as you can tell, OnlyFins means it's a Finnish roster, so okay, nothing too crazy to write home about there. He did have a stint with Echoes, and then for those who don't know, Echoes briefly was on 100 Thieves, and there was that whole thing where he was then let go, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Echoes then went and played also, I think, in India for briefly, right? And then now he's on a collegiate team in the US. Crazy. There's a lot of changes for him as well. But anyway, moving on. You can see Eccles is still here, as well as some other players. And then we have a little stint Polvi had on Mad Lions, where, okay, now we're seeing some other names that you might be familiar with if you only follow kind of tier 1 VCT. You see XMS, you see Doma. It's like, okay, these are names I know. And then you dig back a little bit further, and now you have him on 10-star. And he was on 10-star for a very long time. And if you look at the beginnings of 10-star, they actually came over from their own team called Terran Mill. And you're going to see a familiar name in Russ that carried over with him over to 10-star. Okay, so that's our first connection. That's our first connection to the current global esports roster, in which Russ was announced 2 weeks ago as the new IGL. So it's like, okay, well, the IGL had some chemistry with Polvi before. Now, what's also interesting, was it actually on 10-star? Hold on, let's go back and check. There was no, this is even before that. These are all the teams before that. This is the very beginning when he was playing on Finnish teams as well. I want to say, yeah. And then you look at 10-star before they became Mad Lions. And then you look at the coaching staff. And hey, what jersey is this? Oh, Global Esports. So Spin used to be the coach for that team. And Spin currently, at least for the time being, as far as we know, still on Global Esports. In fact, I think this is updated. I didn't actually keep track of the coaching contracts, but he's now listed as the head coach until 2026. I don't know if he was always until 2026, but anyway. So yeah, so Spin, he was part of the coaching staff last year for Global Esports as well. Still continues to be on that roster. So, okay. So back in 10 Star, Spin was part of the coaching staff. Russ was part of that crew. They are both now reunited under Global Esports. Wouldn't be surprising that Polvi would be part of the discussion, right? It's not like they were just watching VODs and said, hey, let's like try out this guy, right? There was enough reason to reach out to him. It's the current World 2 on Perts Max. No, it is 1, but I don't know the details, so I can't speak on it too much. But supposedly Russ doesn't count as an impact because of how his ID works for like Indian residency, etc., etc. I don't know the details on it, so I'm not going to speak on it in detail. But supposedly he does not count as an import, and Global Esports has said it themselves. I assume they would only say it once they really double-checked it with Riot, so supposedly he doesn't count. So, okay, so with all that said, that there's a connection here, okay, I mean, yeah, makes sense that they could reach out to Polvi. His numbers are good. He's still playing right now in the off-season, for Valiant. He's doing well. So, he's a duelist. They need a duelist. They need a dedicated duelist at the very least. I mean, Lightning Fast can play Raze here and there, and he can flex around. But so, yeah. But other than that, I mean, yes, his numbers are pretty decent. But it just seems, other than the Russ and Spin connection, I'm just like not seeing the color here for Global Esports, right? I'm just not seeing it. I'm then again, even with these four, it's like I'm not really seeing the color to begin with, quite frankly. It's a very interesting combination of players. I don't think if anyone told you like, hey, what do you think the likelihood is of Benkai, Blaze King, Russ, and Lightning Fast forming a team in VCT in 2024? I think a lot of us would have said like, that sounds random. I don't know. I don't think it's very likely, and now here we have it. So it's a little interesting. However, here's my take. JUGi is no longer with Focus. So Focus just announced their new roster in which JUGi is no longer a part of it, and then they had a follow-up tweet saying that, JUGi is no longer with Focus. So he is now a free agent. As we see in chat, JUGi used to play in CSGO. For those who don't know, here is just some team names that you wouldn't know. He played on teams like Heroic and Astralis, etc., etc. So, he was quite well respected as an opper. I think, his peak was probably on Heroic, and maybe the consistency not quite there later on, but JUGi was a known name in the later parts of CSGO before he switched over to Valorant. And then he switched over to Valorant. And in fact, they even highlighted him in VCT EMEA last year, right? As, one of there's the whole series Next Up, I believe, where they highlight kind of newer players in the VCT scene, and they highlighted him, and he was putting up some really good numbers on the Jet. I mean, it helped Focus get into qualify for VCT and even try to have a shot to try to compete all the way up to Masters Copenhagen. Obviously, the run didn't happen, but it was off the back of JUGi. And so, okay, Explosive Jet has, or at least at times, had pretty good movement, used to be known as a really good opper. I mean, I think this solves a lot of the problems that Global Esports was also looking for, similar to RRQ, right? So, personally, I think it'd be very exciting if you're bringing in an import to consider JUGi as a choice. Now, the other thing is, I don't think he's like gonna have a lack of options. I'd imagine that there's a handful of tier 1 teams that would be considering him, and how trials go, etc., is a whole different story. So I couldn't tell you, but I think it's a very interesting option to consider. Now, Global Esports isn't the only one that that could consider him. I mean, any of the other teams, if they're willing to consider a English-speaking comms. There's a lot of other teams that he could fit into in Pacific, and not just in Pacific either. So there are some other options here. But in some ways, and I will say, I feel like this goes a little bit more in line with like their seems like they're trying to build a roster that has like a pre-existing following. And I feel like Yugi's name maybe carries a little bit more just in terms of brand name than Polvi, not necessarily skill. I found it interesting, actually. If you look at their all-time career stats, Polvi's jet stats look a little bit better. I guess it depends on what you're looking at. Rating Yugi is higher, but for me, like, without looking at VODs, to me, like, if we're looking at just jets, it's like first kills per round, things like that. And Polvi is a little bit higher on there. But the overall damage, overall kills per round, Yugi is a little bit higher. Now, we don't see any Rays on there, but he did play a decent amount of Neon as an opper. Not surprising that he dabbled in a little bit of Chamber. Listen, I think there are some options. He's, you know, I think the last video he had put up was still like 2 months ago or something. He just puts up these like highlights on his YouTube. It's just highlight. He just says like Valorant highlight number something, and it's edited, but that's I get. And he just keeps uploading these highlights. So he's still grinding away. Obviously, he was playing on Focus until the very end here, with their last match back in July. So I think this is an option. I think this is an option for any Pacific teams that are still looking for imports, which Global Esports, they have been. And now, again, the thing is Global Esports made it sound like they were already in the works for a long time and they were just waiting for kind of the nuts and bolts to all be tightened up for their contracts before the roster is announced. So whether it's Polvi, whether it's Yugi, whoever it is, probably in the works for a long time. But with Focus now announcing their new roster and seeing that Yugi is no longer part of the roster, again, it's not crazy to imagine that he was part of that discussion the whole time. So, which, by the way, Big Time seems to be out now, so I guess we can color that as out as well. In fact, we can just delete it from this side. So that's my personal take. But I will say, I mean, am I a little biased? Yes, I'm much more familiar with Yugi than Polvi. So this is nothing against Polvi, but stat-wise, Polvi seems to be doing well. I was trying to look at the VODs for Polvi in the recent France off-season, and I couldn't, at least not on VLR. I'll be very honest, I didn't do a proper Google search, but they only have the Twitch VODs, which you cannot watch in Korea, so I didn't get to watch the most recent matches there. 마오가니님 안녕하세요. So yeah, so these are my two takes. I will say, even though I'm more familiar with Yugi, even with Yugi, I don't think oh, his I is lowercase. I mean, I don't think this really like makes Global Esports suddenly like a very exciting prospect, I will say, whether it's Polvi or Yugi. But no matter which it is, if it's either Polvi or Yugi, I do think, okay, with the amount of veterancy they have, including these two, if the coaching direction is in the right direction, they could really become similar to like a Team Secret, right? Where they're a good power check team. So something to keep note of. Nothing new on my end from Talon. Boy supposedly also trialing as a player, but we'll have to wait and see on that front. Nothing new for DFM either, which is quite concerning. And then Bleed was all solidified last week. So where does that leave us? Let's get ready for our favorite part of each week. Just slap the Dark Horse tag on him for some Fox Hype. Global Esports, I don't know if that's... Here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. With the roster changes we have so far in Pacific, it's like, well, I don't know if you can really call Bleed a Dark Horse anymore. Yeah, they're the new guys on the block, but they have Scary and EA and Darion. It's like... I mean, I don't think they're a dark horse, right? I mean, RQ's a little closer, but then they were part of the league last year, and they were very promising in 2023. So, I don't know if they're really a dark horse. I think they're just like a really strong challenger. So, quite frankly, you're right. I mean, the only teams that I think even have the chance to be called a dark horse is Global Esports, the new DFM, the new Zeta. I mean, even GenG with already Meteor and Texture and then well, okay, we won't really count HSK, but Meteor and Texture, it's like, I mean, can you really call him a dark horse? You already have 2 powerhouse Korean players. So, I mean, same with Zeta. If they keep Lasdep, Sugar Zero at the minimum, it's like, okay, well, it's like, I don't know if you're really a dark horse. But then even Global Esports, it's just a combination that's new. I mean, Benkai, Blaze King, Russ, Lightning Fast, they've all played at high... Polvi and Yugi also, they continue to play in Challengers. I don't think there's a really clear, like, dark horse other than if DFM comes up with something crazy, right? Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting thought, though. The concept of a dark horse. Column. Thank you. Okay, so let us copy over last week's. Okay, so for GE, let's assume, I mean, either Polvi or Yugi, I don't think it really changes my thoughts on their overall roster. Now, here's the thing. Oh, man. You know, the weight that Saya player and King hold is crazy, right? I feel like if either of those players were just, like, slightly weaker, I would actually be as crazy to put Bleed confidently over Team 1. These 3 is... oh, it's tough. I will say RRQ being at the top of these 3 is definitely a little bit of bias on my end. And this is much more of an intangible, like, I just think stylistically... but then again, we have no idea what Bleed style is going to look like now in T1 either, so it's an interesting question. Global Esports. Do they move up with either Polvi or Yugi? I mean, I actually think so. It's tough to say, because GenG, like, Meteor and Texture are good, but... I mean, if the rest of your team is... not great. Because here's the thing. I don't think Meteor is at a point yet where he can just, like, hunker down on his own mental and solo carry a game against, like, significantly tougher opponents. Right? Like, I just don't think he's at that level. And looking at all the other rosters that are being solidified, it's like, yeah, I mean, I talked about it, was it last week or the week before? Like, Bazi would be a neat addition to GenG to join alongside Texture. And Bazi's great, but other than that, if they get anyone else, I'm like, I don't know if Meteor's going to have the proper support, right? Yeah, they're going to need a strong mental guy. And here's the thing. Bazi, not historically known for his mental. Texture, also not historically known for his mental. Meteor, definitely not historically known for his mental. So, who do you get? I'll tell you who's known for his mental. JUGi from Challengers Korea was known for his mental, but whether he's, you know, whether people think he's still good enough to be part of Tier 1 is a different story. But I think now with other teams being somewhat solidified, I think GenG does have to move down. Zeta, let's assume that the core stays together. Yeah, I mean, it's incomplete rosters, so it is tough. But Global Esports, we can kind of assume it's somewhat complete. I'm trying to decide. I mean, I think in that sense, I agree with 6. It's like, okay, I mean, like I said, I think they could become a very good power check team alongside Team Secret, right? If we are to consider kind of Team Secret's performance of 2023, which they were exactly what that was, like a gatekeeper power check team. I think the new rosters of RRQ, T1, and Bleed all clear that. I think they can. I think they all have a significantly likely chance of clearing that bar. Global Esports, do I think they have a likely chance to clear it? No. Do I think they could? I mean, yeah, I think that's kind of a toss-up on any given day. The thing with Talon is, here's the thing, if you just look at the names, I think they should be ranked higher, but they really squandered that hope in 2023, that it's hard to carry that hope further. Dude, I just want DFM to do something so I can get them out of 11th, man. I want to. Trust me. Yes, there's always going to be a last place, and there's a story there, but it's like, even as analysts, etc., it never feels good to just look at a team and be like, they have 0 wins and they're going to continue to have 0 wins. Like, it just never feels good. Okay, you at least want some hopium so you can get excited about something. So far, we don't have that. Okay, so we make some changes to G. That's about it, though. And I talked about it last week that I think this is slowly going to be how it's solidified. Again, I think the 3, 4, 5, there could be some shuffles, especially if we start to see some of them during the offseason. But this seems likely. Now, I would say who has good chances of jumping up? Zeta could, not massively, but they could try to vie for like a 5, 6 position. GenG, I think maximum they go back up, no matter who they pick up, is like a 6, 7 for me. Talon, I think Talon would be kind of the dark horse for me, right? I think I would power rank them at 10th, 9th or 10th, but be like, hey, if they fix the chemistry issues, if they finally decide to settle on that and not play musical chairs, they could be a dark horse. So they would be that. And then DFM, there's just a massive question mark. Your last preseason prediction should just be MVP split, first split playoffs first, and the split. Oh, MVP split first place playoffs first, and the split last. MVP would be an interesting one, though. MVP would be an interesting one. Anyway, that's it for week 5. How many teams do we have that's pretty much solidified in their rosters here? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So about half. Global Esports, I imagine, should be close to announcing something unless something has gone wrong. Team Secret, I mean, we'll see. So we're getting there. The Japanese teams, man, they gotta do something. They're running out of options. They're running out of time. And GenG, I imagine the reason GenG wasn't in a rush is because they were very set on making an all-Korean roster. I can only imagine that's the reason. And while some Korean players have gone to play in China, all these Chinese teams have like picked up double imports because they can for the qualifying tournament for VCT. So, I imagine that there's still a chance for some of these Korean players to come back. So we'll wait and see. Yeah, that's the only thing, and obviously China's gonna have more money than GenG, but again, it's a lot of double imports, so there's a good chance that GenG can still pick up whoever. Or if they were just saying, hey, we keep Meteor Texture and then we bring up 3 new guys and we try to just do a long-term project, then they're in no rush. There's no other competition, right? So I actually think the more we look at it, that's okay. The only thing, as I mentioned earlier in the video, I would love to see a deeper coaching staff. But that's it for week 5 of VCT Pacific Rostermania. Let me know what you guys think about all the changes so far. Which teams are you most excited for? And especially with the recent signings. I mean, what are your thoughts, right? RRQ Jemkin, GenG, head coach HSK. We've got some new changes coming up. Let me know who you think is going to be joining Global Esports as well. Biggest question for everyone. Down in the comments below. Leave a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel for more. And we'll be back next week for week 6 of VCT Pacific Rostermania. See you then.